Hi everyone, Celery here. The last video was on how to be human, but today's video is on how to make humans. To be exact, we're talking about what a potential Sentimarsha child would look like and what other characteristics it would have based on their traits. If you don't know who I'm talking about, Sentinel, real name Marianne, and Marsha are characters from Reverse 1999. Reverse 1999 is a turn-based tactical RPG gacha video game where you get to see all sorts of characters from different time periods in history be tortured by the narrative in unique and interesting ways where you have to pump money into the game to pull for characters that you want to pump something else into you. Sentinel and Marsha in particular are from the World War I era. If you don't know what World War I is, I suggest closing YouTube and picking up the nearest non-fiction book you see. Now, genetics is extremely hard to make conclusive judgments on, given that we don't have DNA to analyze or complete family pedigrees. However, we can make inferences and make the most probable outcome for each trait, such as hair color, eye color, height, etc. The only regret I will have and have had making this video is that I may end up being excommunicated by BluePoc, but that's a problem for future me to think about. I will try my best to keep the sex jokes to a minimum, so without further ado, let's begin. Before we get into the child's traits, we should first think about what kind of child we're talking about. Basically, if the child was produced via cloning, or Sentinel was assigned male at birth and Marsha was assigned female at birth, or the other way around. In even simpler terms, if the child's a clone, or if Marsha gave Marie personalized riding lessons without the necessity of a horse. Now, if the child was a clone, things would be very easy for us. A clone will have the exact same genetic material, also known as genotype, as the parent it derives its DNA from. Differences in traits, aka phenotype, may appear due to differences in environment, but assuming there isn't a massive event that alters the clone's physical appearance, she would either look like a mini Marsha or mini Marianne. But there are two problems with this assumption. Firstly, the first ever animal to be cloned was Dolly the sheep in 1996, a good 5 decades after the era Sentinel and Marsha are from. Secondly, this would be an objectively boring way to look at things, so let's take a look at what would happen if they vigorously exchanged DNA. The traits we're looking for are not limited to physical ones, though we will be going over those first. Marsha has short and wavy red hair, blue eyes, and approximately 166 centimeters tall, or approximately 5 feet 5 inches. She has a mole on her face right next to her left eye, and healed scars from deep gashes on her hands when she caught Sentinel's bayonet when crossing swords with her. If you are wishing that were a euphemism for something else, you're not the only one. Sentinel, on the other hand, has long, mostly straight gray hair and gray eyes, and is approximately 116 centimeters tall, or also approximately 5 feet 3 inches. Other than the fact that she can cast herself in stone due to her gargoyle nature, there is not much to discuss when it comes to Marianne's canonical physical appearance, but I'd assume that she's also about 10 centimeters or 4 inches. Now, here's where we begin to get into a bit of mix of lore and headcanons. I believe it is reasonable to assume Sentinel has scoliosis, characterized by a side-to-side curve of the spine as a result of her gargoyle lineage and abilities. In the real world, gargoyle statues are almost always depicted as these creatures with hunched backs with a stout frame standing guard in front of cathedrals and other buildings. In many of the available assets we have depicting Sentinel, she is always seen with a slight head tilt, commonly associated with scoliosis along with uneven shoulders. Even in her battle sprite, her hips jut out weirdly compared to the rest of her body, perhaps to compensate for an uneven waist or one hip being higher than the other, which are also likely symptoms of scoliosis. While this may be an attempt to look cunty or a mating dance to attract potential mates, I doubt this is the possibility. Ankylosing spondylitis, also called axial spondyloarthritis, is a type of inflammatory disease that affects mainly the spine and causes scoliosis. Over time, vertebrae in the spine fuse together, which decreases back flexibility and can lead to a hunched posture. It is my belief that Marianne's constant use of her ability to cast her body into stone has led to muscle atrophy and or nerve damage, and eventually, scoliosis. One of the most common complications of axial spondyloarthritis is uveitis, or eye inflammation, which causes, among other issues, redness in the eyes and increased light sensitivity. A common trope of gargoyles is their trait of petrifying when coming into contact with, you guessed it, light. And this isn't the only theory that I have in mind for both Sentinel and Marsha, as I wanted to go into detail about autism again, but I don't think that I have the time to do that in this video, so stay tuned for potential part 2. But as we want to take a look at potential results from the crosses of traits between the two, we are presented with a challenge. The fact that many human characteristics are polygenic, or non-Mendelian traits. The terms Mendelian and non-Mendelian traits come from Gregor Johann Mendel, an Austrian botanist and Friar who is often called the father of genetics, and not much of a father to anything else as he was quite the gloomy figure who never married as a celibate. His most famous study was on the inherited traits by pea plants when crossing different parent peas and documented 7 recorded characteristics: height, pod shape, pod color, seed shape, flower position, and flower color. Taking seed color as an example, Mendel found that when a true breeding yellow pea, meaning it was produced by 2 yellow pea plants and not true breeding as in what Marsha does to Sentinel on Friday nights, and a true breeding green pea, meaning it was produced by crossbreeding 2 green pea plants, their offspring always produce yellow seeds. However, the most interesting part was that in the next generation, the green peas reappeared at a ratio of 1 green plant per 3 yellow plants. Mendel didn't know it at the time, but what he discovered was the effect of dominant and recessive genes. That is, the fact that some genes are recessive and will be masked by other dominant genes, which can be observed with his test cross squares shown on screen here. His findings led to further investigation of these traits by other scientists, serving as the foundation for genetics. However, humans are a lot more complicated than pea plants. This fact may be put to the test when the teammates I play with on Overwatch seem like nothing more than photosynthetic vegetables, but it's true no matter which way you look at it. As stated previously, most of our traits are polygenic or non-Mendelian, meaning they are controlled by multiple genes and may not show incomplete dominance, where one trait does not completely mask another and both are expressed. Height is an example of such a polygenic trait. I'm sure you've heard of stories where both parents in a family are really short but their kid is really tall, or vice versa. This fact makes it impossible to tell even just the probabilities of how tall the kid would be. Nonetheless, a popular height estimation method for children in the real world is to take the average of 2 parents, then adding 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimeters for boys, or subtracting 2.5 inches or 6.5 centimeters for girls. Since we have 2 female parents rather than 1 male and 1 female, this additional height manipulation is not necessary as Marsha will be putting inches into Sentinel instead, and we can just take the average of them both. Since Sentinel is approximately 160 centimeters and Marsha is approximately 166 centimeters, the projected height for the child would be approximately 163 centimeters, or 5 feet 4 and 11/64 inches. Next, let's move on to eye color. Here's a fun fact for you. Scientists believe gray eyes are caused by a similar mechanism as what causes blue eyes, but to a more extreme degree. The mechanism in question is a lack of melanin in the eyes due to the OCA2 gene on the chromosome 15, which has a significant impact on pigment production. Blue eyes is a recessive trait, and since all the gargoyles we've seen have had great eyes, it is my assumption that, at least in the reverse 1999 world, gray eyes are a recessive derivative of the blue eye trait. And even if gray eyes couldn't be calculated this way, there would be at least a 50% chance for the child to have blue eyes due to its recessive nature, as we can see from a simple test cross. Thus, we can safely conclude that the child would either have blue or grayish eyes. Those with light color eyes, including blue and gray, also tend to have higher sensitivity to bright light, which are less likely to suffer from the skin disorder vitiligo, a condition in which the immune system attacks cells with melanin pigment and leaves behind irregular patches of white skin, and are more likely to suffer from ocular melanoma. Next, let's review hair patterns. If you didn't know, straight hair is considered recessive to curly hair. Do you remember how we mentioned incomplete dominance in genes earlier? Well, the incomplete dominance of curly hair over straight hair results in wavy hair, which is what we observe in Marsha, meaning that she has one dominant allele, which we'll label as capital A, and one recessive allele, which we'll label as lowercase a. Since Sentinel has straight hair, she has 2 recessive alleles, both of which are lowercase a's. If we reuse our handy-dandy test cross from earlier, we can see that there is a 50% chance of the child having wavy hair and a 50% chance of the child having straight hair. As for hair color, it's a bit trickier. Unlike gray eyes, there are no cases of people having naturally gray hair that isn't stress or age-induced in the real world. It is mostly caused by the death of melanocytes and the loss of melanin in hair follicles, which eventually become permanent when there are no longer stem cells to replace them. Therefore, for the sake of my sanity, let's just say gray hair is just manifested in gargoyle bloodlines, and Sentinel and Marsha will have at least 2 kids, so then each kid will have either red or gray hair. And to conclude the physical attributes of the kid, they will have a higher chance at developing axial spondyloarthritis if they use their arcane ability often. However, if we're following the canon timeline, by the time that the war is over, neither Marsha nor Sentinel are pregnant nor have given birth, assuming that the earliest that the child could be born is in 1920, meaning that the earliest that the child could be born in is 1920, assuming that Sentinel and Marsha got busy as soon as the war was over, or perhaps even before so, as World War I in reverse lasted 2 years longer than in the real world. As the child is growing up, they would likely have no reason to cast their body into stone, assuming they inherit the ability to do so. Then, assuming World War II begins in 1939 just as in our history, the child would be at most 19 years old then, the perfect age for conscription. If the child joins the war, then it is likely they would need to use their transformation skill frequently, which would then lead to the development of axial spondyloarthritis and, eventually, scoliosis, just like in Sentinel. So, to summarize the main points of this video, I went over the differences in child production methodologies, observed physical traits in both Sentinel and Marsha, a headcanon for Sentinel, what Mendelian and polygenic traits are, and finally, the child's potential traits. I have identified the following combination of characteristics as the most likely outcome for the child. An estimated height of approximately 163 centimeters, or 5 feet 4 and 11/64 inches, blue-grayish eyes, a 50-50 chance of either having wavy or straight hair, an undetermined hair color of either red or gray, an increased probability in developing ocular melanoma, a decreased probability of developing vitiligo, and the potential to develop scoliosis from overuse of gargoyle transformation. It is a shame that I will not be able to delve deeper into this topic, but I need to get my 2 videos per patron for Reverse 1999 or Blue Pog will blow up my house. Sorry for all the jokes about Marsha laying pipe to Sentinel in this video, but I assure that they were completely necessary for the essay's progression. As it turns out, I'm also not crazy far from being able to monetize my videos, so it might be almost time to say goodbye to the ad-free experience on my channel. Sorry not sorry, but I need as much gambling funds as I can get. And finally, thank you all for watching. Have a nice rest of your day, and peace.
Never fading.